they've been kind of manipulating words and labeling groups of people the whole time. Hipsters, punk, it's just labels that are being put in there. And then when you analyze punk and see actually who, that all of the beat poets that are tied intimately with the movement were like homosexuals, alleged pedophiles, members of NAMBLA, it becomes kind of a scary picture to start to move forward with.
At the exact same group of people that started punk as the rest of the scene. And of course, William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, you know, we discussed Howl last week, as you just mentioned. We did the series week before last exposing Allen Ginsberg and all of these guys, Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Joyce Glassman, who's Daniel Pinchbeck's mom, out of the Greenwich Village MK Ultra team out of New York. And then, so essentially, this the pedophile William Burroughs is the godfather of punk, and as well as the godfather of the ayahuasca scene, etc. today.
Yeah. Yeah, and him and Ginsberg are linked with the Yage letters that I learned from you and your research. And yeah, like these guys are, it's a completely contained little unit once you start unraveling it, and they're all
right. So, well, tell us, how do Burroughs and Ginsberg and Sinclair and these guys all go into and kick off the punk scene, and how does it bleed out from there?
Well, there are different approaches for different poets. So I'll start with Ginsberg, since we're talking about him. And for Ginsberg and Burroughs, they have a similar line, and I would like to label the Hotel Chelsea out of New York as like a nest of all of this. Hotel Chelsea's had many punk rockers and counterculture people living there. They've had people I've heard from you, like Arthur C. Clarke lived there, and he wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey there. Madonna lived there. Just tons and tons of people have lived there. Occultist, Harry Everett Smith, Ginsberg. And again, most...
Well, and occultist Harry Everett Smith kicked off the whole folk music scene, and he's one of the key people that Hans exposed with me in the Music, Mind Control, and Psychobiology series.
Absolutely, and I have new links to corroborate everything you guys have displayed, just on a different spectrum of culture. So Allen Ginsberg, I found out he and his lover Peter Orlovsky shared a female lover, and her name was Denise Mercedes, and she's about fourth from the top on the left there. Okay, yeah. So Denise Mercedes was in a band called The Stimulators, and I found through research, one book was called Beat Punks, that she was lovers to Peter Orlovsky and Ginsberg, and she was in a punk band called The Stimulators. Another member of that band was a young man at the time. I believe he was 11. His name was Harley Flanagan. His mother, Rosebud Falou-Petit, was lifelong friends with Ginsberg. They were so close, in fact, that she was at his deathbed, and she was by his side when he died. So this family has been with Ginsberg for a long time. So according to the writings I've read, Ginsberg acknowledges knowing Harley since the age of 1, and they lived on a farm together. So with Harley, we find he is in a band called The Stimulators, of which his aunt was a member of and was lovers to Orlovsky and Ginsberg. And again, he was in this band at the age of 11. So he goes on, some time passes, and he goes to what becomes another band called the Cro-Mags. And the Cro-Mags are known in hardcore punk rock. There's a tag to add on to the punk rock is hardcore. They're known as a catalyst for a sound change. In addition to Harley, there's a gentleman named John Joseph, and forgive me, but I'm going to go into tangents occasionally, but John Joseph's in this band as well. And John Joseph came from a background of being raped and molested in foster homes, whatnot. He joined the Krishna movement early. He was an example of some of his exploits as a Krishna, where he dressed up as a homeless Santa Claus in a wheelchair and begged for money. And he got like thousands of dollars and gave it to the Krishna people. So this is how involved and how wrapped up John Joseph's mind was with his affiliation with the Krishna people. In addition to that, I found an interview with John Joseph when I was doing research on a totally different section of punk rock. And in this interview, he acknowledges knowing a guy named Joel Rifkin, and Joel Rifkin is a serial killer. Joel Rifkin killed a woman named Tiffany Bresciani, and she was a drug addict who dated a singer in a band called Reagan Youth. Now, why I bring up Joel Rifkin is in my research on Joel Rifkin, I found out that Joel Rifkin was landscaper to Sophia Casey. And Sophia Casey is the widow of William. Joel Rifkin.
That didn't take long.
Yeah, so Joel Rifkin's serial killer is the landscaper for William Casey's widow before he goes on his murder sprees. And he came from a organization called the Planting Fields Foundation, and it was ran by a gentleman named Owen Smith, who was a very close family member. I didn't figure out what family member to William Casey, but he ran the foundation that Rifkin was doing landscaping at.
For those who don't know, just to interrupt you there for a second, William Casey is the former head of the CIA.
Yeah, it's the head of the CIA. Iran-Contra, all kinds of things that I didn't list because it just falls under the umbrella of the CIA, and it's an incredibly tangled web. Rifkin was introduced to the widow Casey from Owen Smith, who is a close family member, and when you analyze Owen Smith, he's friends with people like Peter Schweitzer, and he's also an attendee of the Institute of World Politics. And in my research, I'm jumping the shark and kind of doing some speculation. These schools, I think, are spook schools. I think that I'm pretty safe in saying a lot of these schools are spook schools like this, the Institute of World Politics.
I don't know if that would be pulling the fawns and jumping the shark, though, you know.
So that's our first little digression right there. Off of Ginsberg, we have Harley Flanagan in a band. And again, this guy knows a serial killer. The serial killer worked for William Casey's widow. Let me pull this up here. So, and again, this is an incredibly tangled web. Harley Flanagan is in the Cro-Mags band, and their theme is Krishna, vegetarians and Krishna. And that becomes what's known as Krishnacore. And so there becomes a hardcore punk genre where Krishna bands with Krishna themes and actual Krishnas in the band go around and play shows. And they were the forerunners of that. They're also, Harley is also credited with being the first American skinhead. He is credited with being the first American skinhead.
Wow.
And the skinheads came out of New York. And he brought it, he created the American ones or got it manufactured, but it was going on in the UK and Ireland first.
Ah, okay, got it.
So he brought it over, and what he did was he got his head shaved in Ireland, and I can't remember the lad's name, but then he came back over as the skinhead, and he basically literally just put out ads in punk fanzines to become a skinhead and hang out, and people started answering. And so the first skinheads were originated by Harley Flanagan in New York.
And so they just ran an ad, and then that's how they created the wow.
Yeah, and I have all the links. I got all the stories. It's corroborated from different skinhead historical accounts. Yeah, they ran ads in punk fanzines, and it started in New York, and I don't know where it went from there, but it was California, Chicago, so on and so forth. And originally, skinheads weren't intended to be racist. It was like a blue-collar scooter thing, oi music, but it did mutate into a racist organization. And Miles Mathis actually has a guest writer named Kevin who did some work on the skinhead origination in the UK and manufactured fascism, and it's quite fascinating. So we have another vanguard of our, one of many vanguards punk's going to bring, skinheads, Krishna hardcore. Again, the skinheads originally weren't racist, but they did turn into racist skinheads. And doing analysis of Harley's tattoos, I saw a tattoo on his shoulder of the number 18, and that is directly a racist reference to Adolf Hitler because it's the first and the 8th letter AH. So Harley eventually mutates into getting a tattoo representing white power, white pride, or whatever faction. Okay, so we have this guy who's known Ginsberg since he was 1. He is in a Krishna band. He's the first American skinhead. And when I thought and pondered about that, the instant symbology was theosophy. If you think about theosophy, it has swastikas, the Aum. I mean, it's we see, you know, or when I put my mind to it and I just think of those dualities of Krishna and racist skinheads, theosophy symbolism pops into my mind, and that we know is intelligence-fronted wizardry. You know, it's got its intelligence front as well. So it might be some type of intentional manifestation of theosophy that Ginsberg participated in. I'm totally speculating there, but I mean, that's the polarization of those two things, Krishna and skinheads, again, are mind-blowing to me. Ended up in the research. So I've learned quite a bit about Gandhi and nationalist Hinduism, and Gandhi's assassin was a cross-dresser. Like, I learned all this crazy stuff doing punk rock research. So with Harley, we want to analyze his mother, Rosebud Philou Patet. And we find that she was basically like a groupie with the New York Dolls. She hung out at the factory with Andy Warhol. She was a groupie with the Fugs, the Velvet Underground. But she was also spiritual wife to Harry Everett Smith. So now I just want to remind you that this Rosebud is Harley Flanagan's mother. So we have this family as his spiritual wife connected to Harry Everett Smith, first skinhead, first Krishna bands, Allen Ginsberg, and I mean, it can't get any more blatant that the Cro-Mags and Harley Flanagan lived
and then Harry Everett Smith was a big Crowleyite. Basically, the whole music industry, as Hans and I have shown, is based on this guy, Harry Everett Smith. He's the one that put together the folk music collection for the Smithsonian Institute, Anthology of American Folk Music. He's one of the original beatniks, which, of course, ties right back to Allen Ginsberg and the whole gang.
David Johansen and the Harry Smiths. And that was directly tribute to Harry Everett Smith. Yeah, so, you know, and that guy was in the music. He was in the band for Saturday Night Live in the 80s, David Johansen. So, yeah, like right there out of the gate, I can take us on a little tour from Ginsberg to an incredibly, you know, I kind of feel bad. I can't imagine that this young man being exposed to Ginsberg from the age of 1 with occultists and a groupie mother came out of this well. And if you look at his life now, like within the last 5 years, he went to a show where his old band Cro-Mags played, and they wouldn't let him play in the band even though he's the founder. And there was a stabbing, like he stabbed somebody and somebody stabbed him back. So, I mean, these guys are probably a little older than me. I'm 44. And they're stabbing each other still. Just to clean this up and just give another spook link, Harley's cleaned his act up. He's, you know, for a couple years, he's authored a few books, and he also happens to be a mixed martial artist trained by the Gracies, but he also trains Anthony Bourdain's kids in mixed martial arts. And Anthony Bourdain has some pretty spooky leads. So in all corners, in all reaches, we find red flags. Ginsberg had a lot of a relationship with another factory member named BB Hansen, and BB Hansen is the mother of Beck, and they're all generational Scientologists. Let's see here. Okay, James Harper Grohl. This is a fun one. James Harper Grohl is the father of Dave Grohl, and Dave Grohl was in a punk band in Washington, D.C., which is exploding with red flags that I've documented. But he was originally in a punk band from D.C. He's the lead man for the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl. So going back to his dad, Dad was an assistant to Robert A. Taft Jr. after he got out of media. Now, if we follow the Taft bloodline up, we go from Robert A. Taft Jr. to Robert A. Taft.
Right, to Skull and Bones.
To the founder of Skull and Bones.
Right.
And so James Harper Grohl, just to get back on track, talks about getting hit on by Allen Ginsberg when he was younger. And goes on, and he's working with conservatives. So when you find out why he's getting hit on by Ginsberg, it's because he was a part of the hippies for a while. So this hippie guy flipped it, became a conservative with the bloodline of Skull and Bones families. They have a son, goes to a DC punk band. He starts the Foo Fighters, and that's, again, like, according to the world, allegedly, and TV reports, that's like one of the biggest bands in the world right now for pop entertainment.
And of course, that comes through Nirvana, which was so seminal to the grunge movement. So
yeah, well, and of course, Nirvana was Kurt Cobain, and then we're right back to Hank Harrison.
Right. Yep, right back to.
Hey, Hank, you're probably watching tonight. Good to talk to you, Hank.
Yeah, because he was Hank Harrison was the father of Courtney Love, who was Cobain's wife, and and then of course Harrison was the manager and a handler of the Grateful Dead at the beginning of their career.
When first 6 months or so, yeah. Right,
and he's the one who made the slip that the band was from Masonic families. And see, this is why your research into Dave Grohl is absolutely fascinating and really good work. I'm very impressed with this, because you now have Skull and Bones, these secret societies that are at the root of all of these bizarre cultural debasing music phenomena. Now to show that Skull and Bones is at the root of Nirvana and the Foo Fighters, and to show that Masonic families are producing, the Grateful Dead, which is also, of course, connected into Bohemian Grove and MK Ultra and all the other things, a organized plot. I mean, at some point, it just becomes self-evident. You go, well, this is not circumstance. What you're looking at is a generational structure of people who are trying to take society into a debased condition. And of course, the purpose is to make us easier to control.
Absolutely. And Hank Harrison's made my database. And yeah. And well, the thing is, it doesn't stop with Hank Harrison. Like, we find out, if you analyze Courtney Love's family history, she's a direct descendant to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., member of the Pilgrim Society. Right. So it goes farther than Hank Harrison, but Hank Harrison's just like the puppet. But behind the scenes, a couple levels, we got the Fairbanks family related to Courtney Love. And of course, Masonic. Can you do me a favor?
And Hank, if you're watching, we don't mean any insults. But
we're hoping to have Hank on the show, which
yeah.
We have communications with Hank from time to time, which are very fruitful, but then somehow always end, and we can't quite get them to come forward and get them.
Right. But I mean,
like people like Dave Grohl, anyone who is that we're bringing into the analysis, that feels that they're somehow being misrepresented by showing them as part of this web. For heaven's sakes, come to the show. We're perfectly happy to have you come on the show, Dave and Courtney. You'll be permitted to come on, and Hank, and we'll be happy to talk with you about this and let you tell your side of the story and explain how these circumstances were simply accidental. But anyway, Kerry campaign, he actually dedicated an album to him and went on tour proselytizing Kerry. And if you really just pause for a minute, he was proselytizing the liberal Skull and Bones against the conservative Skull and Bones.
as a rock star. So these punkers aren't anti-establishment or ex-anti-establishment. They are the establishment.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're anti-establishment as long as you don't cross the line of Skull and Bones, because they're
And for those who don't know, John Kerry and George W. Bush were both Skull and Bones. So, you know, making a tribute to John Kerry is a tribute to Skull and Bones. Sorry to interject.
Oh, his relationship to Kathleen Hanna, and she's basically the spearhead for third wave feminism through Riot Girl. And that comes directly out of Evergreen State College, and DC as well. DC had its hand in pumping the Riot Girl movement through another group of individuals called Positive Force. And so Dave Grohl dated Kathleen Hanna for a long time. Currently now she's with Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys, and they're completely manufactured New York punk rappers. But yeah, the Kathleen Hanna link is extremely thick and thorough because of the Evergreen State College connection. And again, Kathleen Hanna, she's kind of like, as I've learned from you guys, the term lifetime actor, where she has this background and history that seems to justify her feminism, but it's also directly opposing feminism. So she's been raped a few times, I think at least twice, and she goes into that. She's they're the pro-abortion people, so they always wear the coat hanger shirts. These Riot Girl bands actually have Planned Parenthood as like a co-opt, and if you go to a show, which I've not, but I know they're out there, if you go to a show with these Riot Girl bands, Planned Parenthood will have a booth, an actual booth set up at these shows, and they'll have banners saying we support Planned Parenthood.
They don't sound very family friendly.
Yeah. Yeah, and spinning
They're
off of
trying to destroy the family.
Absolutely, and I'm that's why I wanted to substantiate your guys' thesis. I think this might be the spearhead right here. I think Truck is the spearhead.
Wow.
It gets hairy. But back to Kathleen, you know, she was influenced by Gloria Steinem, and allegedly she saw Gloria Steinem when she was a child, and her mom took her to like a feminist rally or whatnot. So she references Gloria Steinem. She references the Red Stockings, which were CIA infiltrated or CIA ran, depending on whose version you believe. And Steinem was doing work with Zbigniew Brzezinski, doing revolutionary work with Zbigniew Brzezinski. I found that out about Gloria Steinem. Let me try and find that quote here. Yeah, so Red Stocking Collective. Oh, that's not it. Sorry, guys. Yeah, other participants in that effort included a youthful Zbigniew Brzezinski and future Washington Post reporter Walter Pincus. So she was doing radical action with Zbigniew Brzezinski.
That was the beginning of the color revolutions. That was where that whole technique came from. It was the youth festivals that the CIA ran in these different European countries. That Gloria Steinem was one of their key agents, which she was caught being, and then came up with this story that, well, the CIA is a great liberal organization. You know, this was when MK Ultra is doing, you know, chemical lobotomies and keeping people in a coma for a month to erase their mind. I mean, you just want to pull your hair out when you hear this stuff.
So that's another.
Oh, wow. Debbie Harry there too.
Yeah, Debbie Harry is a fan of Gloria Steinem, and they both were Playboy bunnies, like feminist Playboy bunnies. See, that's a complete irony. But right. You hear her tell it, she was like undercover to find out, you know, how poorly women are being treated. But I think it's just part of the programming. I think Hugh Hefner just had his turn, you know, and it's just part of like the progression through the system that these sick people have to go through.
Well, and also, I mean, promoting women being called as animals, like a bunny. You know, yeah. This was a grown-up version of the Mouseketeer, you know, by Walt Disney. You know, and so we can see the generational progression. People wanting, you know, to get any understanding of Disney, just research the Uplifters, the club in Santa Monica that had as its title Uplifting Lucifer. This was the title of the organization. Contained people like Frank Baum and G. Gordon Liddy's father. And so then Disney goes on to, found the Magic Kingdom with the Club 33, the obvious Masonic, restaurant. And then he has the gall to claim that he's some kind of a Christian. What kind of a Christian is in a club called Uplifting Lucifer? What kind of a Christian has Club 33 with all the Masonic symbolism?
Let's, Joe, let's not forget that Walt Disney was funded to create Disneyland the same time that MK Ultra was funded. And, none other than SRI did Disney's research for Disneyland. And SRI, of course, is behind MK Ultra.
Yeah, it's just one project. And so when you pick up Steinem, as Nino has done, and Debbie Harry as bunnies, you're in the next generation of debasement where sexualization and animal character, calling them animal names is now just normalized. It starts out with the Mouseketeers, it's cute and innocent in the next generation. And then, of course, beyond this, then you get into where they call them punks, right? So now you're really debasing because it's, you go from the Mouseketeer to the bunny, and now they're punks. And they named it the punks is because the word stemmed from basically a homosexual slave in prison, right? So that's really what is in back of this name. It's another basically animal name for a group of humans that they're trying to push us down further and further into, before the transhumanism occurs, we lose all humanity, but we just get pushed further and further down each generation with, this descent of language and terminology. And
Santa Cruz, he's up in the right area. Green Party, Butthole Surfers, Dead Kennedys. I mean, yeah, listen to that. I mean, we're talking about the whole gay agenda being sold via Ginsburg and Burroughs, et cetera. I mean, what kind of name for a band is Butthole Surfers, really?
Yeah, it's sad.
So with Jello, you find a very intimate relation with Tim Leary. And we all know about Tim Leary. We also find that there was this talk, and that's why I wanted my notes. I can't remember the name of it. Okay, so Timothy Leary had a reading with Jello Biafra with William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Marianne Faithfull, and this was the River City reunion. That says a lot right there. Then you got some other...
Look, yeah, I didn't know he was tied to Billy Idol too. Jeez.
Oh, yeah, and so, here's a lot of the links. Actually, these links come from a partner researcher named Masonic Youth. He's part of my blog as well, so that's why I had to pull it out of the email here. But yeah, so he was part of that. Leary consulted with Billy Idol. Leary played the father in a suicidal tendencies video. He also worked with new wave band Devo in their home video. And he also, this is a kind of a fun one, he made a cameo appearance in Stuff, which was directed by Johnny Depp and Gibson Haynes about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, John Frusciante. Now, Gibby Haynes is in the Butthole Surfers.
Call a band de-evolution. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. But then, when you glorify the drug death, that's really a behavioral suggestion to a generation, right? The beautiful drug death of people like Morrison, Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, all the Foo Fighters. Okay, it is possible that this is just circumstantial. I doubt it. I think that actually when you look at it in the context of what we've shown with MK Ultra and how they're influencing society, guys, we've got to look at this as just another one of the debasing elements. They're basically just putting an idea, trying to get it past the consciousness that, that really drugs, suicide, die young. And this really bothers me because I think that, it weighs on young people so much because so many of them are having hard times as it is, just because society is so difficult to find a path in these days. Family is so hard to create. Then to put these ideas out there deliberately is just, these are, psychopaths. They're basically engaging in warfare, and they're trying to cause people to kill themselves.
Absolutely. So with Gibby Haynes, we find his dad is Jerry Haynes, and Jerry Haynes was he was on television in Texas, and he was a graduate of Yale, was in the Air Force, Louisiana State, and he was on the television in Texas, and he was a children's show presenter named Mr. Peppermint. And it was on WFAA. And what makes Mr. Haynes pretty unique is through his career of being Mr. Peppermint, when Kennedy was assassinated, he switched gears and became one of the very first people, if not the very first, one of the very first people to bring the JFK assassination into the lexicon through the television set through news. So I think that's an incredibly odd coincidence. When we also think, going on another tangent, that Ian McKay's dad was in the actual motorcade of the JFK assassination. Ian McKay from Fugazi, Minor Threat out of D.C. His dad was in the press bus of the JFK assassination. We find that John Peel, and he's a record producer from England, but he's intimately attached to the punk scene. He was down there, and he has pictures of himself. He's captured in images, historic images of the JFK court trials. So we have punkers peppered and punk fathers peppered into the JFK assassination. We also have a relationship with, I think his name's Phil Graham, and that is a descendant that one of the Talking Heads married into. And Graham actually talked Kennedy into taking LBJ as his running mate, and also committed suicide after the fact. So we got punk pepperings through history and all over the place, and that's just another tunnel I can go down.
And that's really important, because when you look at the background, when you see things like Skull and Bones, and you see all of these connections into the halls of power and wealth, then the idea that there would suddenly be a generation that would decide to produce punk, that just is so non sequitur. This wouldn't be what these people with their backgrounds would be doing unless it was something that was organized.
Absolutely. And I have military connections for days. I have conspiracy connections for days. Again, it's so hard to cover in an hour, and I we knew we were going to, basically make it difficult to cover all your connections. In fact, probably would take, years to really go through the whole thing. But I think that
now, first it was the 60s counterculture, then it was the 70s cocaine era, and the 70s and 80s punk scene, etc. Each of these, the rocker scene, the burner scene, each of these are merely military uniforms that the government has created. They've created the soldiers for each one. They created them and MI6, etc., created the punk scene. They populate it. They send out letters, or advertisements for skinheads to join them, etc. And we see this recruitment, and then this, passing out of uniforms like they were privates joining the army. It's no different.
And also that the media, the Project Mockingbird media, the media which is part of the operation, then puts these images in front of us like Woodstock and the punk scene and the Foo Fighters. Suddenly they become these huge stories for some reason, right? As if there wasn't other components to the reality on the planet, but no, they have to cover these particular individuals. They just, you can't get away from them, and their stories, their music, and their, are just constantly reinforcing the debasement that, as you pointed out, the uniform that they wear, the lifetime actor role that they have is designed, to hurt us with.
Well, the leader is the lifetime actor. It's the Pied Piper, literally.
Yeah.
And then they get all of these people to put on the uniform. They're the generals, and they get all the plebes to put on the uniform and follow them along. And they destroy our children and our families in the process, because clearly they are afraid of any family challenging their power. So if they can destroy the family, the backbone of society, and if they can institute this socialist mom on welfare feminist society, then they have total control, and they win Huxley's final revolution.
Well, it's just they can use eros as the technique, to get the mind control into place, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so when Nino plugs in this research, right, that shows all these relationships, then that fits really naturally into this vast structure of, what basically can only be called warfare, psychological warfare against the people by the secret society. They are trying to break us down. It's deliberate, and and we have to learn how to think in the right way so that we can defend ourselves against the control, the mind control, and all the other elements that are negative. Here's what the music is, right? This is where it comes from. These are who these people are. This is what's happening to you. This is what they're doing to you.